Hi, my name is Hannah, and today we're interviewing Mikhail. Mikhail is a barrister based in the Caribbean. He is admitted to practice in a number of Caribbean jurisdictions, including the BVI. He focuses on cross-border commercial disputes as well as insolvency and regulatory litigation. Today he gives us his view on the socio-legal and economic trends as we emerge into a post-pandemic world.
This podcast channel is about you, successful international entrepreneurs, successful expats, successful investors. Sponsored by HCJ.tax.
Mikhail, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Derren. I'm happy to be here and happy to be a part of this series of talks.
Fantastic. And please, could you introduce yourself? Say a few words about who you are.
Sure. My name is Mikhail Charles. I am a barrister by training, or that's a fancy English term for lawyer. I currently practice in the Eastern Caribbean. I'm admitted to practice in Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where I'm from, hence my flag. St. Lucia, the British Virgin Islands, and the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay.
I'm also based out of a niche commercial firm in the Turks and Caicos Islands, and in addition to my very modest private practice.
Okay, wow. You're obviously a very busy guy. So as we were saying earlier, and I'm really excited to get into this with you because you and I met in London, so you have that UK/European perspective, and then in the Caribbean as well, and what you experience in the BVI, an important offshore financial center. So I know that you bring a unique perspective to the table. So having said all of that, what are your thoughts on this present unprecedented challenge that the world is facing right now?
Well, my immediate thought is opportunity, new ways and new synergies of working, but as well there are a lot of threats. When it comes to the offshore world, the offshore has now become almost a dirty word in some circles for a legitimate tax reduction as well as business opportunity. A lot of the major joint ventures in the world, because of a differentiated regulatory regime in the offshore sector, a lot of the offshore companies are used as prospecting tools into new and developing economies. The major opportunity, I think, is for the Caribbean as a whole and Caribbean professionals individually to more or less up their game in terms of providing services electronically. Now, due to maybe an incidence of history or incidence of culture, we tend to be very old-fashioned and very paper-based and very by the archaic book, as opposed to by the book, but by the archaic book. And what we've noticed in particular by the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and the other courts of the British Overseas Territories, for example, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Turks and Caicos, which are also other major offshore centers, is that there has been a rapid acclimatization to digitization, to digital hearings, filing of documents electronically. You find lawyers being encouraged to give undertakings and make statutory declarations as a check against fraud and to enhance the due diligence processes. Another opportunity, I think, is that it also makes or breaks down silos between practitioners and professionals. We encourage more like how you are on the other side of the world and I'm on this side of the world. We're interacting, where we're having a virtual conversation face to face. Not that it may not have happened, but I think Corona is just a catalyst for us finding new ways of delivering solutions. Whether you're an accountant, whether you're a lawyer, a doctor, whatever profession you are, at the end of the day, if you're not building something with your hands or the technical skills, your expertise must be demonstrated because your product is time. A billable hour, a billable minute. What value are you creating for your client, and what solution are you promoting for your client? And I think that is where the Caribbean, despite the initial shock of COVID-19, that is where the Caribbean, I think, has a particular strength delivering solutions.
Wow, okay. So you started off by, sorry, is there feedback? Can you hear me okay?
No feedback.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
So you started off by saying that, unfortunately, offshore is beginning to have a negative connotation, or it has had a negative connotation. And that's something that has started. Sorry, let me just turn it off. So let me just turn off my phone. The bank is trying to reach me. Power off. Okay. Right. So that is something that started pre-pandemic.
Yes.
As we pass through this pandemic, I noticed that, well, part of the way in which governments are supporting their economies and supporting their citizens, supporting their local businesses, is by some sort of financial incentive, some sort of financial support, a stimulus payment. And I noticed a number of jurisdictions are being careful to point out we are not supporting local businesses that are using offshore financial centers as a means of legitimate tax reduction. So it just seems as if the pandemic is accelerating or exacerbating or making worse that pre-existing trend. So how do you think, I mean, I know you do talk about delivering value and whatever, but at the end of the day, the offshore financial centers, they're offering a service to advanced economies primarily.
Yes.
And if the advanced economies continue to paint offshore centers in a less than desirable light, what does that say, or what avenues or what strategies can realistically be used to combat that?
Well, I think the strategy that has been advocated and is being led by a lot of the major offshore centers is that of transparency, but as well managed transparency. I think sometimes because of a lot of the noise, with greatest respect to the proponents for the transparency initiatives, but a lot of the noise that is being created doesn't necessarily make the distinction between privacy and secrecy. Already the BVI, the British Virgin Islands, Cayman, Turks and Caicos Islands, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Grenada no longer has an offshore sector anymore as of 2018, I believe. But these islands have all demonstrated that they've gone and set up independent financial intelligence units. They're fully paid up members of the Egmont Group, of CFATF, which is the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And they have some of the most robust laws that simply say, if you want to have access to beneficial ownership, then you must have a legitimate request, often supported by a court order. However, that doesn't seem to be enough for a lot of the foreign or the more onshore commentators and activists who are not elected, by the way, who wish simply to be able to access people's private information at a whim and at a fancy, to often advance very curious and dubious claims about wealth. But again, that political discussion is a bit above my head. I simply focus on the practicality of it. There is no perfect system in the world. However, even when you look at the onshore jurisdictions as compared to the offshore jurisdictions. The offshore jurisdictions win almost hands down in terms of the managed transparency initiatives and managed privacy of company or other entity registers in the world. I mean, take for example the UK. The UK introduced a publicly accessible register, think about maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and there has been serious commentary about the effectiveness of that register, as opposed to a tiny, as some would say, a 4x4 island who is able to manage thousands, almost hundreds of thousands of entities with a well-regulated and thought-out structure. There is a reason why the Caribbean is the leading offshore sector in the world, because we put the time and the work into it. As in respect of COVID-19 and its impact, I do have a concern that I don't think is being readily recognized by the lawmakers here. For example, in England and in a few of the other onshore jurisdictions, they have passed laws to suspend directors' duties for companies who may be on the brink of insolvency, thereby extending the informal corporate rescue culture of those countries. There has been no such impact here in the Caribbean in respect of directors' duties for companies that may be incorporated here in the Caribbean. And I think that is an area that can be and should be looked at because the pandemic is affecting everyone. There's an economic slowdown, and usually it's like almost like a sine wave. The onshore jurisdictions get hit, whereas we seem to be up. And then by the time the onshore jurisdictions begin recovering, then is when the effect really hits the Caribbean. So I think we're not quite into the woods as yet. But from what I'm seeing on the ground, in terms of practical preparations by registered agents, by lawyers, I think we are preparing for the storm that is coming.
Understood. And what do you think about the great emphasis that we're seeing now on substance requirements?
So maybe for our viewers, we should just expand a little bit on what substance means. Economic substance requirements, it came out of a discussion that was had by the European Union COG group, which is a governance or corporate governance think tank of the European Union, and then it was picked up by the OECD and a few of the other major international bodies. It simply means that in order for a company to receive the favorable tax treatment of an offshore jurisdiction, they must demonstrate that their center, well, not necessarily a center, but they have a significant link or a significant physical and other practical presence in that jurisdiction. So, for example, bank accounts, senior executives. It mustn't just be a postbox type system where on paper their office is in, let's say, Road Town, Tortola, or Kingstown, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but you must actually be able to visit that country and actually see the economic substance of that country, of that company there. Those economic substance considerations have been implemented in the British Virgin Islands in particular, and they have been implemented and they are being regularly, what's the word? They have been implemented and they are regularly practiced. However, there was a drop-off in corporations in 2019 and 2019, sorry. But things seem to be picking back up now with a move towards persons incorporating holding companies as opposed to actually having your main registered office. So the structures of companies are slightly changing somewhat. to sort of avoid the imposition or avoid having to comply with that economic substance requirement, because really and truly it makes it it's an unfavorable economic climate. So even though things got bad when it now came in, but you know it's getting better now as companies think outside the box, really.
Mm-hmm. But I was wondering, when I first saw it being implemented, whether it would present an opportunity for offshore jurisdictions like the Caribbean, and that if it were taken at face value, you would see great employment opportunities for local professionals, as they now are being invited to play a more meaningful role in
Yes.
their companies, in their jurisdictions, as well as perhaps more expatriates being based there. But from what you're saying, that hasn't exactly happened.
Yeah, it hasn't exactly happened, and now in respect with COVID, I don't think that is actually going to happen anytime soon, as we look at the fallout from COVID. And I think perhaps we could. I think our way forward could be a rethink of the economic substance legislation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, St. Lucia did try. St. Lucia tried having a head office. They amended their offshore law to allow for head office companies, whereby if a multinational moves its head office to St. Lucia, then they could actually comply with the economic substance requirements and as well bring inward investment into St. Lucia. From my recollection, I think maybe 2 or 3 companies from the Far East took that up. But as to whether or not those companies are still going concerns, I won't be able to speak to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But economic substance is something that, you know, it is something that continues to tickle the legal mind.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice way of putting it. But you know, stepping back now and looking at the regional economies, obviously these economies were and are more than just offshore financial centers. There's tourism, there's agriculture, there's some light manufacturing, there's trading. There are a lot of pieces to that wider economic puzzle. And like elsewhere in the world, the slowdown is real, the economic contraction is real. And that presents itself as a challenge. And unlike more advanced economies, there's no public purse that you could necessarily tap into, and like in the US, have a $2 trillion package or whatever the case may be. What challenges do you see facing these small island developing states, and what strategies perhaps they can adapt to cope with the challenges that lie ahead?
Well, I think a lot of the challenges would stem from the primary activity of those companies, of those countries, which is tourism.
Yeah.
So tourism has more or less stopped.
Mm-hmm.
No activity, no cruise ships, no flights. It's just stopped. Agriculture still is limping along in terms of inter-island trade, but it is very limited, and of course those products have to undergo fumigation and other phytosanitary procedures. The outlook is bleak.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere from, Trinidad, I think, has forecast a contraction of their GDP of above 10%. And that's on average in each island, starting from Trinidad in the south all the way up to, let's say, Bahamas in the north. So taking, for instance, the Bahamas, which is a major tourist destination, Turks and Caicos Islands, which is 80 to 90% based on tourism. And you could think what has happened as a result of sudden closures of airports, sudden closures of borders. The outlook is just very, very bleak. And I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but there is literally there's no idea of when things would recover, if they would even recover. One of the unintended effects maybe of all of the shutdowns around the world is that people's caution levels have changed, as opposed to when H1N1 was around, and foot and mouth disease and chikungunya. Every maybe 1 or 2 years you have a new contagion. But this one is different. The fear of not knowing what underlying comorbidity you may have really strikes home to a lot of persons. And I don't think the tourist market would recover. Your typical tourist is someone who is probably over 50. I'm seeing this the Caribbean model now. But generally someone who's over 50, maybe semi-retired, has some cash to burn on a destination type experience or a relaxation type experience for the smaller islands. And those are the persons who, unfortunately, may, as a result of having a hard life or basically being a professional and not necessarily understanding what underlying lifestyle diseases you may have, diabetes, hypertension, you almost put yourself at risk. Now take a look at the cruise industry. Cruises stop at maybe 10 countries in the Caribbean in a particular cruise. Those have stopped. Strategies that the countries are using, I'm seeing stimulus packages, but those stimulus packages are coming out of reserves. And in some cases, from the Caribbean Development Bank through rapid loan assistance. It is a loan that would have to be paid back someday. In terms of the other industries, I mean, Trinidad and Guyana, because of their extractive resources and their extractive industries, can blunt the sharp edge somewhat. But from Barbados going all the way up to Bahamas, with the exception of Jamaica and the Dominican Republic, there is nothing really that we can take out of the ground and sell. You travel to say you can export people to work overseas. So it really is, it is bleak. I have hope that things will begin to pick up, but the agriculture sector, being what it is, just cannot support the entirety of the economy. I mean, offshore finance as it is was not a major part of any economy, except maybe the BVI and Anguilla. But apart from those two countries, the other member states and territories of the Eastern Caribbean are and will be continued. Beyond the continued black watch, not even bleak watch, but black watch. But I have, hope, and I have faith that things will pick up maybe next year.
Okay.
Apart from the strategies of stimulus, I don't see the government doing anything else.
So this is connected. Yesterday I was on a webinar with one of what I call in my mind the big three. I don't know if it's truly one of the big three. One of the big three, I won't name them, firms in the economic migration space. Okay. And what they are saying is that they're seeing an upswing in interest in foreign residencies as a result of this. And I know from anecdotal evidence from myself personally and others in my smaller circle is that it is a concern now, because many of us have had, and I say us because it happened to me, we've had the experience of being locked out of our homes. In March, when things began to get quite serious. I thought I was just going on a quick business trip to Indonesia out of my home in Singapore. And then when I tried to return like 3 days later, Singapore had locked down. And, you know, I'm told, you know, just in our circle, we know hundreds, if not thousands of people that happened to. And not just Singapore, but other parts of Asia, people have been locked out, parts of Europe, and so on and so forth. So that's one thing. People are looking for jurisdictions where they can find themselves should things get uncomfortable in whichever jurisdiction they call their primary residence. They're looking for that. And then in addition to which, outside of the US, because the US is still the world's reserve currency, most other countries, as you pointed out yourself, are dipping into reserves or going into debt. And at some point in time, that debt comes due. And as a government, you're one of the few tools in your basket would be raising taxes. So again, some people are saying, well, you know, I foresee that in my jurisdiction, a tax increase is now inevitable. And if I'm to protect my wealth, not just for myself, but to pass it on to my kids, I may need to re-domicile, I may need to restructure my arrangements.
Right.
So, and then on the third factor, I guess, would be just healthcare, because in some jurisdictions, healthcare just fell apart. And the hospital system, not just public but private, because I guess this conversation would really be among people who can afford it. Even with cash in your bank, you still could not get access to decent healthcare because of the obvious concerns. So those three things have led to an uptick in the exploration of alternative citizenship and residency options. Me, myself, I'm personally looking at Portugal. So I'm flying to Portugal next month to get that sorted, out. So I'm just saying that this perhaps presents itself as an opportunity, because obviously the Caribbean is already established in that space, and St. Lucia has cut some of their package.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
In an attempt to attract that, but I'm just thinking that really presents an opportunity to the 5 or so countries that play in that space.
Yes. It's something that I've been looking at. I was also on a webinar with one of the major players in that space, and they had the Prime Minister of St. Lucia on as well, commenting on some of the innovations that St. Lucia has taken in order to attract that sort of business. Going to the third strand of your push about, or what you just said about healthcare, St. Lucia has just commissioned and just opened a brand new hospital in St. Lucia, and of course the other islands that also play in that space may not have that sort of healthcare facility or that sort of healthcare capacity, but at least, which goes back to the impact of COVID, I think people need to be aware that if something does go wrong, you could get a fairly decent standard of primary care, but that follow-up care, that specialist care, you may need to have air access to. And if the borders are closed or not, you're not going anywhere, and that could present a problem. In terms of the citizenship as an actual viable tool, again, just a slight business pitch, but of course, citizenship of any of the Eastern Caribbean islands that do play in that space gives you visa-free access to well over 130 countries. That could be more, but on average, visa-free access to well over 130 countries. There's also a stream of business through Grenada that allows you, I think it's the EB5 visa category in the US.
E3.
The E3, the non-resident investor visa, I think. Yeah. There's a stream of business through Grenada that has been developing as a midway pathway into that. Of course, citizenship comes with certain requirements, and one of those requirements is investing into the real estate of that particular island. And I'm happy to note, because I've been locked in, whereas you've been locked out. I've been locked into St. Kitts. And as I drive around and I'm seeing the development that is still going on despite COVID. The infrastructure is changing and being improved. There's proposed port expansion, and there's an underground feeling of prosperity, to put it bluntly. Sometimes you just have to be underground. Sometimes see the people going into the shops, and a good litmus test is what's happening in civic society and the arts. And of course, even though all the carnivals have been cancelled, there's still a very vibrant artistic expression that's happening, and that vibrant artistic expression in each island, because I managed to island hop before I got locked in. So I went to St. Vincent, I went to St. Lucia, and then I got here in St. Kitts. Just the underground feeling is, things, despite COVID, there was an upswing before COVID. So let's hope that is able to sustain citizens until things begin to pick up.
So there's, let's say, there's a glimmer of hope. All is not yet lost. Yeah.
There is, and I think the stimulus packages themselves, they're finite and they're geared towards just holding the fort, so to speak, until things begin to pick up. So, for example, St. Vincent has a 2-month stimulus package. St. Lucia had a very innovative package whereby civil servants got paid both in cash and in kind. They got bonds redeemable after a certain point in time, which I think is fairly innovative in that those bonds, you don't have to cash them out. There's something that you as an accountant would know better than me, the value of a bond, the value of a treasury bond, backed by, you will get your cash because it's backed by the state. St. Kitts has a 3-month stimulus package, I believe. Antigua, 2 or 3 months. So it's geared towards what the science indicated at that time, which is maybe 2 or 3 months. It will take the world maybe 2 or 3 months to start to get a handle on new practices and new procedures. To handle and to cope with this pandemic.
Okay.
So all is not lost.
All is not lost. On that note, Mikhail, thank you for your time. I appreciate you sharing your on-the-ground experience as to what's been happening and the opportunities that exist not just in the offshore financial space, which is what is synonymous with, but now in the evolving economic migration, citizenship, residency space.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Derren, for having me, and best wishes to you and all your viewers.
Thank you very much.
All right.
And